I think there are probably a number of ways of answering the question. The simplest idea is the idea that we get in our own way. So famously, Tim Galway, the author of The Inner Game, spoke about potential minus interference being equal to performance. So the notion there is that if you can reduce the interference, then more of somebody's potential is available. So that's the ground of it. You reduce interference, and interference is fear, is self-doubt, but it's also often lack of clarity. So that I would hold was the first thing, the removal of interference. The second thing I would bring into the conversation is that idea of clarity, that people frequently aren't clear about not only their goals, but they're also not always clear about, I want to use the word orientation. They're not clear about where they are in the moment and how they relate to the various elements around them, their context, the organization in which they work, the changes that are occurring in their particular discipline or profession, the strategy of their organization. And so orientation, clarity about that, and clarity about where one is headed, and obviously then about how to get there. So I think those are the two primary things: interference, clarity. And then there's the third thing, which is that I was speaking with the chief executive of a large drinks company this morning, and it's really clear that what he really needs is a space in which to think, and he needs a thinking partner. So simply that place to be creative, to have silly thoughts and discuss them. So I'd add that as a third one. There are some people who argue that a manager can't coach. But that's a fundamental misunderstanding, and it comes out of a very psychologically orientated model of coaching that says coaching is about kind of deep probing into somebody's psyche. It's not. Coaching can be deeply pragmatic, action-focused and goal-focused. So as a manager of others, my ability to help them think through their role, think through their goals, think through how they're going to achieve it is absolutely fundamental. Of course, there's a problem, which is that kind of enabling and kind of listening conversation is quite difficult to hold in a command and control culture. So managers frequently don't want to coach because they want to maintain control. And the coachee, hateful word, player is a better word, the coachee, the player, doesn't want to speak up in front of their manager for fear that they'll say something stupid and lose their salary. So I hold that actually those are merely interferences, to use the word earlier, and that it is the manager's job to be able to have sufficient control, management, and sufficient enabling, coaching, both in place, and then leadership as the third part of that situation. And to hold both kinds of conversations, and that's where when people have clarity from the kind of the management side of things about what they're supposed to do and what they're going to be held to account for, and once that's clear, the manager then does the coaching about how they're going to do it. That's when you see higher levels of performance emerging. It's really clear that there are huge levels of active disengagement within employees, the workforce, across the Western world at least. So another advantage is that you get more engagement. People start enjoying their work a bit more. They're listened to. They feel that they've got some skin in the game. So that will be another part. And the third part is that if a manager actually starts listening to his people, he may end up with, or she may end up with, more ideas than they had in the first place. So there is the possibility of innovation. I think before answering that question, we've got to take a step back and to look at it's a kind of a slightly forced distinction, but kind of 20th century business as opposed to 21st century business. We've done in a 20th century business, the entirety was about compliance. The management approach was about compliance. So from, kind of Henry Ford kind of streamlining his production and defining each and every task, to total quality management, to things like Six Sigma, we got better and better at managing out defects. So so efficiency was the name of the game. And in an efficient environment, what you're looking for is compliance. And that's okay in a manufacturing situation when it's kind of inanimate objects. When you've got human beings there, that becomes really problematic. So the first thing, before we even begin to talk about innovation in the 21st century, is to understand that management practice built on a notion of compliance simply doesn't work. It works to a certain point, but we've hit the rev limiter on that. We're not going to get any more out of it, and we're faced with a different order of problems. We're faced with people younger than me, who are less and less willing just to show up for work. They want to work for a company that's ethical, they want a job that's meaningful, they want to be engaged, and they simply don't understand people from my generation and slightly younger who won't give them authority, because if they want something, they go on the internet and they find it. So they don't understand a compliance, authority-driven approach. It just simply so something's got to change to enable those people to get into the workplace. Something's got to change to allow us to be increasingly innovative, because that's where the future is. There's that things are moving so fast that a hierarchical command and control situation isn't going to help anybody. And the final part of that equation is customer service. That if you're in a very hierarchical institution, you have no freedom of how you respond to a customer. It's all prescribed. So customers will simply put down the phone. They won't listen to you anymore. They're just not interested. So that there's a whole lot bound up in kind of 20th century business practice. So the first thing is to do with what coaching really started at. Coaching started, and I know because I was there, with a whole notion about kind of liberating the individual, about having the individual stand in their own shoes, experiencing their own authority, their own autonomy. And what happened was that coaching got caught in the compliance game. So in the coaching relationship, one-on-one, lots of coaches started paying more attention. We became to the organization's needs, and we became agents of compliance. So the coaching industry has got to look itself in the mirror and say, "Whoa, what's going on here?" So I think the first thing is that we need to start investing in the individual. We need to start understanding that it's less about organizations and more about relationships. So a good friend of mine, his son works in a very top-end game, video game organization, and they did a map of all his key relationships, the places that he learns, where he's inspired. And what they found was that of the 20 people, 2 of them were actually within his own organization, the rest were elsewhere. So we've got to invest in people, we've got to give them their liberty, and if they only stay with us in our company for a year, that's fantastic, we've been part of their journey, if it's been a productive year. So I think we've got to start thinking entirely differently about the nature of organization and see it as relationships that's win-win for a period of time, and then that person may move on. Again, we're into one of those kind of catch-22 situations, because what that requires of people is Seth Godin, an American author and blogger, and one of his more recent books was called Linchpin, and it was about putting oneself as an individual into ethically and authentically into a position of doing what you're great at, and that being your value to the organization. So the trouble with that is lots of people don't want to take that risk. So there's another, back to potential minus interference, there's that whole thing of people actually not taking risks. So it requires people who are willing to stand up follow their heart, follow their intuition, and work with the consequences, which, you know, to take responsibility first and foremost for one's career, and not to sell that to the organization, because I think that's part of what happened. We're talking to a large multinational logistics company, and their recent feedback says that the thing that their employees want most is for the organization to help them manage their careers better. It's like, that's tragic. It's tragic. So it's having people take responsibility for their career, for themselves, for their role, and for what they can get from their work, both in terms of remuneration, but also in terms of the simple kind of autotelic pleasure of doing a job well for its own sake.